Our topic for this morning is the way tarot brings spiritual perception. And this morning's talk will wind up the group that we've had for the month of October, in which we've been showing you how tarot aids you in preparing the personality for initiation to the mystery schools. Now, I hope you recall that we've been discussing the vital importance of developing our intellects properly and of recognizing our intellects as the tool or the instrument through which the self brings about the differentiation, or shall we say the more complete individualization of the aspirant, or even if it isn't an aspirant as yet, of the evolving being, which we call man. And we have also tried to show you how the emotions are something that, or the emotions are something which need to be developed, to be intensified, and to be directed. That is, that in order to be able to have the power to push the thought, to develop the intellect, we have to have the gasoline, so to speak, which we call the emotions. So that preparing for initiation, developing a wholeness, which is the final goal, has a great deal to do with getting the instrument, which is the combination of the body, the mind, the emotions, together, making up the personality, bringing these up to a point of ability, up to a point of direction and power and competence, so that there will be no dangers in going off, shall we say, losing the steering wheel, so the car or the instrument or the personality runs off wild and almost or tries to destroy itself and others, or the motor doesn't conk out and stall us in the various parts of our being where we develop depressions, inability to express creatively. All these powers have to be released, but they have to be released in a proper manner. And you see, the spiritual perceptiveness that comes is dependent, it is absolutely dependent on the vehicle. In other words, the music that we hear is being broadcast from some station is dependent on our radio, isn't it? And the more finely attuned the radio, the better the experience of the music. This is true in any area of life. We have to have an instrument that will not warp what is being broadcast or what is being received. And the problem at this stage of human evolution is that man, being, shall we say, as the gods, truly, being the only creature on this planet that has the same power in miniature that the Creator has, we must have it because man is the only one who can create. The rest of the creatures act in what is called in Kabbalah through the automatic body. And the automatic body really is, in a sense, you might say, is the subconsciousness. Although the subconsciousness is not separate, though we have a way of thinking it is, not really separate at all from the subconsciousness. There are two phases. That is, the subconscious is not separate from the intellect. There are two phases of the way consciousness works. There are two ways that consciousness uses to direct itself and to direct the operations of its goals, that is, to travel towards whatever goal has been set. But the setting of the goal is the creative part of the human consciousness. And when we do not have our instrument attuned, when we do not have it filled with, shall we say, the proper information, the proper data, we go off into all kinds of highways and byways. We do all sorts of foolish things, pretty much as we've often pointed out to you. As anyone who is first learning any kind of skill, when you first try to learn how to draw, your results are very warped, aren't they? And when you first try to learn how to write, it's very poor. And when you first try to learn how to become a musician in any field, you can make other people around you most unhappy, and usually do, during the practice period. Well, the same thing applies to the developing a skill in handling our own mental, emotional states. And until we have this skill, we are not open to true spiritual perception. This is why so much nonsense resides in metaphysics and occultism on the whole, because they do not give enough emphasis on the primary job, and that is developing the mind, the emotions, and therefore also through it the body, to react and act in very special ways where the steering will not be all off. You remember, those of you who drive a car, when you first learned how to drive a car, you were a menace, weren't you? And yet after, some of us perhaps unhappily still are, we never really learned to drive it completely, not with wisdom, as well as with the automatic responses. And here is a very exact analogy of why certain of the powers, certain of the occult and mystical powers, which can be developed, are kept, shall we say, undercover. Because although it is known that most people who have developed a fair degree of emotional force and mental awareness, if they have not also developed with it, shall we call it wisdom, or the feeling for humanity, that is, for one's fellow man, and also in this feeling knowing how to act and react in relation to one's fellow man, without that, it's just like an idiot behind a wheel in a car. Somebody intoxicated with their power, but not intoxicated with the need to protect others from the menace which they are, because they don't recognize this as such. They carry a car or drive it like it were a weapon, which it is in the hands of so many people, as we know. And this is what so many evolving personalities do with their personalities, you see. We drive it like it's a weapon. And if we get upset, we turn it either on ourselves or on others in all sorts of odd ways. We develop self-hatred if we get frustrated, and this self-hatred inevitably reacts in certain hostilities towards others. It's inevitable. Because spiritual perception involves an attitude. And this attitude is giving, shall we say, credit to the miracle of the vehicle and learning to handle it with delicacy, with care, like a delicate china, like a beautiful work of art. To, in other words, love it and revere it for what it is, and yet not to think it is something more than it is. In other words, and again, spiritual perception has to include the realization that you, the self, are not your personality. You, the self, are not your mind. You, yourself, are not your emotions. Yet even though this perception makes you recognize this, it doesn't make you turn your nose up at the mind, at the emotions, at the personality. But it makes you see it as the most precious treasure that you own. And incidentally, you own your personality, you know. I don't know if you realize it. Now, some of you may think, oh, God in heaven, how did I get saddled with this kind of ownership? Well, that, of course, is foolish, because nobody saddled you with it in the first place. You've been creating it. You notice I didn't say you created it. I say you have been and are creating your personality. This is part of your divinity, the fact that you can do this. And the realization that the continuous creation of your personality and bringing it into a perfection so that it's really the most tremendous vehicle that could ever be, the specialized vehicle it should be. This brings about the ability and the capacity to experience the higher levels of your selfhood without warping. Now, let's give you an example or two. For instance, I know of a man, Dr. Case knew him very well, who had a certain length of time in occultism, very short time. Nor did he go in for the, I hate to keep using the word disciplines for fear I'll frighten you away. And yet, I don't know what else we could call it, really. But he was a college graduate. Therefore, you would think, well, he must have had a good mind. No, there are lots of morons who hold degrees. And there are lots of brilliant people who are illiterate. Mentality has nothing to do with technical education, though a technical education is a great aid to mentality, and we mustn't downgrade it. But it doesn't make for a good mind, nor does it make for profound emotions, nor does it make for anything specific in the higher levels of being. It's a good tool if you have the good fortune to be able to have that tool, that is, the education. Otherwise, you can educate yourself. Nevertheless, this man had a college degree. He had some period in occultism. He went to a meeting just for a lark, a Father Divine meeting, and during the meeting he had an extraordinary experience. All of a sudden, everything around him disappeared, and he saw Father Divine as God, sitting on a throne with harpists and angels. I wasn't there, though. And all the beautiful fundamentalist ideas involved with the images, I want you to keep this in mind, with the images that are basically held by the Father Divine people. All this was there in richness, and with it he had this complete exaltation. He had this rapture, he had this ecstasy. Father Divine is God. You know how they get together? Of course, they're very nice people, and they really whoop it up. I love the joy of their feeling, because this is beautiful. It is glorious, and it is what all religion should be, this joyous dance. And this spirit the Father Divine people have, I've always loved that aspect of their teachings, the way they help the members to feel a real love and exaltation in their religion, rather than the frowning, you're going to hell business, you know, and making people walk with trembling tremors. At any rate, he saw this picture, and he was instantly converted. He had this experience. So he dropped everybody, he dropped everything, he withdrew all his ownings and gave it into the Father Divine Foundation, I forget what it is called, and became a member of heaven, because, you know, they live in heaven there. So he became a member of their heaven, somewhere, I forget whether it's in New Jersey, somewhere along that. Is it in New York? I thought their heaven was somewhere in New Jersey, but it might be in New York. And became a most devoted follower. Now, what happened? He had an experience. True. Part of his experience was very true. In other words, the rapture and the ecstasy, that's quite valid. But because he had not yet transmuted the misinformations and the nonsense in his mental nature, the subconscious habit patterns of acceptance in his subconscious mind, because he had not yet transmuted his emotional responses, because he did not yet have discrimination, that is the balance between mind and emotions. He was taken in by an experience that was wrapped in images. And that was that. Now, what does it indicate? Of course, you know what we say, and we say this quite continuously. We cannot permit ourselves to accept blindly anything that anyone else says, anything that anyone else teaches, and this includes me, and it includes BOTA. If you are going to grow, you've got to be able to receive your own verifications, but you need to know what a verification is and is not. So So you see, we attempt to give you correct data, to replace the incorrect data, to help you learn what a true experience does and does not consist of for real spiritual perception. As long as subconsciousness is full of the old habit patterns, of the misinformations, of the lies and the deceptions and the propaganda, as long as it is full of that, we are going to have experiences, if we go in for meditation or get into a hypnotic or auto-hypnotic state. We are going to have experiences that get wrapped around with those images. And mind you, we mean the false images. And then we accept what we see just because it was a psychic experience. We accept it blindly, and yet in the mystery school system, in a certain portion of initiations, going from grade to grade, the initiate, the aspirant, is told, he is warned, stoop not down to the darkly splendid world, for an abyss could gather and will gather at thy feet. And you see, this is one of the great dangers in occultism, where people may be given techniques to intensify awareness, to bring, therefore, experience above the physical level, supersensory experience, where they have not learned how to discount all the things that could be wrapped in our own propagandas, the false trainings, the misinformations, and the prejudices. Now, how can we differentiate? Because we seem to be in this kind of a spot. In order to have spiritual perception, we need to have, that is spiritual perception we can rely on, we need to have our subconsciousness pretty clear. Yet in order to clear the subconsciousness, that is all the data and the things, our memories and the things we think are so, we need to have spiritual perception. So we seem to be caught in a trap, don't we? What are we going to do about it? That's where tarot comes in. You see, the reason so many people fail to achieve the truer, higher states of power, control, happiness, fulfillment, really happens to be because they are attempting to cure an ill with the same ill by just putting in another ill, instead of cleansing, transmuting, and using that energy for better data. It works, similarly, as was pointed out by the doctor who wrote Psycho-Cybernetics. It works in a way similar to these various computing machines. If you want a specific answer to something in a computing machine, if you feed false data into the machine, you're going to get a false answer. All of you, at some time or other, haven't you played with those little adding machines where you take a little, like a pen or a pencil, and you pull down the number 1, and then you pull down another number? On one side it says add, and on the other side it says subtract, in order to get the addition or the subtraction. Well, that's a very simplified computing machine, And all of us, at least as children, I think, have played with some of these little gadgets. Well, now, if you want to know the answer of 1 and 2, to get the right answer, then what you have to do is know how to put in the right data, that is 1 and 2. And then to make it plus rather than minus, that is to put it in the right column. Otherwise, you haven't got your correct answer, and it can just ball up the bookkeeping system very beautifully, I know our adding machine, an electrical one, thank God, now, it went out of some kind of adjustment one time, and we were just working away doing the books for the end of the year, Felix and I, our grand prolocutor, and we worked, and we came out with an answer that just wasn't reasonable at all. And so we looked into the matter and discovered the adding machine had not been functioning properly. In its adjustment, in some way, there was a wrong number going in at certain places. Now, we might have had a completely wrong bookkeeping analysis for the end of that year, and the various tax men and the government men and all the various departments that can descend on one now and make life a nightmare could have descended on us very beautifully, had we not been able to recognize that the answer is not logical, it's not reasonable, and then therefore go searching for what is wrong. Well, the same thing has to be done in regard to learning how to develop our mind and emotions and our subconscious responses in such a way so that if we get certain answers, our mentality, our discrimination can say, that's illogical, or that's unreasonable, and then go back and recheck. Then when we recheck, we learn where we've been making a mistake. Like, for instance, even in relationships. If somebody isn't liking you, I think that you'd be very clever to say, this is illogical. It's unreasonable. I'm very likable. In fact, I'm even lovable. So I've got to investigate. What's wrong here? Where did wrong data get fed into what? The fact that this person doesn't like me. So then you start investigating. Am I thinking of myself as being unlikable? Because this is what most of us do. Well, that's one very good way. Because if we think of ourselves as being unlikable, we're going to act unlikable, and then other people who want other people to be unlikable because they have hostility, you see what happens. I mean, we have a lovely time, and before you know it, everybody is building atom bombs and bases and guns to shoot everybody else with, all very nicely reasoned out and all logical, to their minds because of incorrect data. So we've got to be able to always go back into ourselves at all points, not in the way I have unhappily seen most aspirants do it, and it makes one very sad. They just wrinkle their brows and they look miserable and unhappy about the thing. I noticed several of you unwrinkling that as I said that. Just as though they're going after themselves with a hammer. This isn't kind. Really, if you wouldn't want to do it to someone else, you shouldn't do it to yourself. Looking inside for a greater understanding of what it is that we are doing or not doing, or how it is we are feeling and not feeling, shouldn't be done with that desperation of, I've just got to find what's wrong with myself business. Because all you'll do is find more and more things wrong. You're manufacturing it. What you want to do it more, like when you were learning how to drive a car. It was hard to keep that steering wheel going just in one direction, wasn't it? You had to learn, your muscles had to learn how to direct it in one way or another. And of course, the more relaxed you were about it, the faster you learned. And the more you practiced, the better you became. When I was a child, I started in a class where we were all going to be taught typing. I became quite interested in this method of playing music. They would play the music so our fingers would keep in rhythm. And then, and there would be these cards with each letter for each key. A, S, D, F, G, we did it just like a dance. And I loved that because I loved dancing and I loved rhythm. So this charmed me. It made me enjoy the typing lesson because they gave us music with it and made it rhythmical, you see. And in fact, the thing charmed me so, this rhythm, and this importance of keeping the rhythm, that at home, when I got home, and I was quite a small child, I got to thinking about that method, and I thought to myself, I said, well, I think I can learn how to type faster if I practice it in my mind. So when I went to bed at night, I would picture that keyboard or note. They wouldn't let us see the keyboard at first. They were all notes to make sure that we learned it by touch, you see. So all we were allowed to see were the notes on a card, but not on the actual keys themselves. And so I pictured the card. I memorized the card to make sure that I would know it. And mentally, in my mind, I pictured where each one of those letters were, and I would go over it. I would play the music in my mind for the rhythm, sort of singing to myself, and I would keep practicing before I went to sleep. And then as I did that, I went faster and faster. I just deliberately picked up the speed as I became more familiar with it. Well, do you know, I learned how to type faster than anybody had ever learned how to type in the history of that school. I don't know about other schools. And I just happened to intuitively pick the proper method. I was practicing. Now, you see, practicing happens to be of two kinds. You practice in your mind and in your attitude. Then you have to practice it out there. You subject it to experiment. You subject it to experience. And then experience teaches you whether you've been doing it correctly or not. And certainly you find that in experience you do it better and better. I did the same when I was learning how to drive. I just kept manipulating that gear shift in my feet all over the place every night before I went to bed. Because I said, until this is automatic in my mind, I'll be a menace to myself and everyone else. I won't be able to give all my attention to the steering. Therefore, I have to have everything automatic. Now, the same method is used for developing the ability to be open to spiritual perception. That is, we have to practice in our minds with images. And you notice all this is always in terms of pictures, of images. So tarot comes in, and what do? Because we are so conditioned, we are so propagandized, we're so prejudiced with all the false data, and the impact of the outside makes us forever give causative factors to out there. You know, it's because that happened that I'm in this state. It's because when somebody loses a job that they figure that they are having a certain problem going, whereas they lost the job because there was a problem to begin with, in whatever way, and in various methods that are utilized for problems by ourselves. We express from our own basic imagery of ourselves, as we have pointed out to you over and over again. And whatever our basic imagery is, it has to do with whatever we've accepted as true, whatever we've accepted as real. Now, when we accept as true or real that which is not true and real, our conduct and our reactions are warped, and this makes us monsters in various ways, as is very apparent. Just look out into the world and see how many monstrous reactions there are in the world, and yet the beings behind them are not monstrous. It's the false data that is believed. What is the most miserable thing you can come across? The most miserable thing. It's people who are opinionated and emotional about it, isn't it? You know, they make these strong, opinionated pronouncements with this emotionalism behind it, and they're utterly obnoxious and they're a danger. It's the opinionated fanatics who are responsible for the totalitarian systems of the Hitlers and the Stalins and the Khrushchevs and the Cuba rascal, the Cuban rascal. Yes. And yet, intense emotion is important. But you can see the more intense our emotions are, the more important it becomes for us not to be opinionated, that is, to accept data as being the beginning and end of all things, and knowing that everyone else is stupid or moronic or a so-and-so or this and that unless they accept your point of view. I was so interested just yesterday to listen to somebody who belonged to one of the political parties saying with great emotionalism that the present president had utilized this situation for political reasons, and oh my, the emotions that was expressed there. And the point is that both parties and their leaders use every situation for political reasons. But you see, this person could only see it from that one point of view because he is so strongly and emotionally prejudiced on one side of the line. And this is where we get into trouble all the time. And we lock spiritual perceptiveness away from our hearts and from our minds, because he who knows can know nothing greater. He who is prejudiced is not open to the truth of cosmic awareness. You can see this. You have to have the door open for something to enter in. You have to have the window open for air to come in. And you have to have your mind open to weigh and measure and accept and reject and be willing to get out there and experiment and make mistakes like you had to do to learn to drive and like we had to do to learn to type or to play a musical instrument. We had to be willing to make mistakes in order to perfect ourselves and in order to be able to see what it is we are or are not doing correctly. And we have to stop being so over-emotional on the negative side when we make mistakes. Did we get over-emotional whenever we hit a sour note when we were learning to play the piano or any other instrument? Or did we get over-emotional on the negative side when we were first learning how to drive or first learning how to write or first learning how to read if we didn't get the letter right or the various things we learned to do? No, we saw we made a mistake, and you notice, remember your attitude then. Because when you were a child, you were wiser about that part of your being than you become later. That's really part of what's meant by becoming as a little child, in order to be able to enter the kingdom of heaven. It involves many things. So that's what we mean. The ability to objectively look into ourselves is tied up completely with the ability not to get all upset and emotional about how horrible we are or evil we are or stupid we are, or whatever it is, on the one side, as I think you perhaps are beginning to see. And on the other side, of course, the ability to objectively evaluate your good points and your abilities, and to realize that as a creator you are unique in this world, and that nothing could ever be or approach your own special uniqueness, as was read to you from the Bible reading today. To be able to see that, and therefore to be able, with faith, like the T-O in tarot, the Fool. One thing you may not realize, this is an image of the most extraordinary faith, because there is the figure on the edge of a precipice, which means in order to get to that next mountaintop, that is, to the next development or the next evolution, with a debonair, jaunty self-assurance. The way that jauntily he swings that staff over his shoulder, carrying his knowledge and experience in his little bag over his shoulder. See, he carries it with lightness and with faith. He's getting ready to descend into a valley, that is, to experiment, to test, to try, in order to get to that next mountaintop. And his attitude is what? Absolute and complete knowledge that he's going to get there. Absolute. That's what we have to do in order to be able to truly experience the higher self, knowing who and what we are. Now, you see, because we're conditioned through words and through the impact of prejudices and emotions, the adepts of the inner school gave us the tarot. They gave us a way to reach into our misinformations, and instead of attacking them directly, of presenting the continuous impact of a positive image, so that gradually the misinformation melts out because of the acceleration or the intensification of livingness that takes place as a result of utilizing the actual laws of consciousness as they are. And that's why tarot can do what no other method can do, at least for most people. Tarot can get in there and transmute your old habits of reacting. Tarot can get in there and change your mental, emotional attitudes toward yourself and each other. And it can do it that much more effectively when you work with it regularly, of course. And then when we use our other techniques, it helps to heighten and quicken the quickening effects of tarot itself. So tarot gives us images of ourselves that are real, the jaunty faith of the Fool, eternal and forever, the concentrating ability of the magician in order to develop the mentality, the purity of the subconsciousness. You notice how pure the high priestess looks? There she is up there, tarot key number 2. And this purity is there as an antidote for all the impure elements that we've received from false teachings and false propaganda and false ideas, from fears and hatreds. And this purification, this washing takes place because of this imagery coming in. And then all the other elements that are involved in our living experience, each one of those tarot keys makes an impact in a subtle way, so that suddenly we realize that our personalities have been changing. When we realize that, we also realize our personalities have been changing in a very positive manner. Why? Because we've been giving information in pictorial form to our subconsciousness with our consciousness, which is making it like a computing machine. In other words, giving it a data that's going to help it arrive at its goals or its results in a more effective manner. And it's going to keep us then from going in for all the unnecessary tears and heartaches. It gives us an image of ourselves as being under the care of the Most High. All the tarot keys are aimed at giving you that image. It gives you the image of yourself in such a way that you start knowing, with an inner knowing, that you have the whole universal knowledge to draw from, because you're a part of it. You're in it. You express it. You're not limited to just the area that you work in your creativity. You have a special mapped out area which is you, but you use the infinite universal knowledge when you learn to call on it, and tarot helps you to do that, to open your perceptiveness. And then when you start having your inner experiences of the various kind, you also learn how to differentiate between that which is still colored, that which is uncolored. You're willing to wait and see. You don't have to go out and announce yourselves as being messiahs, if you should have an experience that you are, which happens to so many people, you know. And why do they have the experience that they're the Messiah? Very simple. Part of it is true. We are all the Messiah, every one of us, because the Messiah happens to be the Christ consciousness, the Redeemer. So the impact of something or other comes on where that level gets stirred, but along with that is the nonsense of the mind and the emotions of the subconsciousness, the egomania, the evaluation of the personality as being the self, the inferiority complexes, the need to be something bigger and better than everybody else. So these people, because they have that element in their natures, you see, they color then the experience, a contact, and it becomes warped. And you know what? They become dangerous, really dangerous. So you can see the importance of knowing what reality is and is not, just from a little analogy like that. Now, right now, it's more important than ever before that you start recognizing just exactly who and what you are more intensively. Right now, the degree to which you give let's put it another way. Right now, the extent to which you recognize your own power as a son and daughter of God, as a creator in your own right, in and with the divine creator. As you recognize this, you will be that much more effective in helping to wash and help purify this whole subconsciousness of the mass mind of humanity. You see, we really were very close to great tragedy in the last few days, as you must all realize, because it's just like trying to balance a feather on a finger at this time. The impact of the negative emotionalism is so great in the with the prejudices and the self-hatred, as well as the inferiorities in the mass mind, that it expresses itself out through the nation in all this nonsense. But this morning, I don't know how many of you heard the news before you came here, it looks like we'll at least have another breathing spell before the nonsense creates another crisis. But you see, it's up to the few, like you and I, and we're very few indeed, really, to do something to help stir and influence the direction of the brotherhood of man more positively now. We've been giving out more and more techniques. We've been working together with more and more intensive techniques to intensify your abilities and your powers. And you are not going to have the power and intensity you require if you're going to keep trying to see yourself as a worm or something like that. A worm is a magical, glorious thing. And if you realize that how wonderful a worm was, then I wouldn't object to you thinking of yourself as a worm. But inasmuch as you don't, we object very heartily. Because of, again, you're having a false image in relation to the miracle of livingness. You see, you are a miracle of creativity. Your private world you create by the way you feel and think about yourself, and therefore about others. Your planet is your creation by the way you think and feel about yourself. To the degree that you are hostile, to that degree do you contribute to the wars and the bases and the fights between systems and peoples and all that goes with it. To that degree do you contribute. To the degree that you stop being hostile toward yourself and therefore your fellow man, to that degree do you help bring the creative forward motion of the brotherhood of man into being. Now this you should know. The brotherhood of man is inevitable. It must be. It's a goal that's been set by the higher self, and that cannot be avoided. This is inevitable, and I'm sure no one wants to avoid it, really, not in their deeper selves anyway. Though when I hear some people talk against the UN, I wonder what kind of thinking we have on this planet. If it isn't what we want it to be, it's better than nothing, isn't it? That people at least can get together and fight with each other verbally. Isn't that a step forward? You know, there was a time when they say, why, you insulted me. Pull out the sword. Come on now. See which one manages to stick the sword into the other one first. Now at least they can get together and have a good free-for-all verbally, and some of the energy gets drained off. So certainly the UN isn't what we want it to be yet. But if you're a true occultist, and if you truly aspire, you're going to think in terms of world brotherhood, because you are a member of all humanity. The Master has been active in the UN from its beginnings. This is his most important concentration. And we are being trained to help give strength and power to that, because certainly the average man can't. He's too full of prejudices. He's too full of hatreds. He doesn't aspire to perfect himself. You aspire to perfect yourselves. Therefore, you can be utilized. And don't forget that one loving thought sent out on the ethers can comfort somebody on the other end on the other side of the planet who you never saw, because it's an energy that has been sent out that will wipe a tear. One loving thought only. Think how powerful. Love is the greatest power in the universe. Therefore, it's up to you at this time to use your power to love, to start seeing yourselves as a glorious, wondrous, lovable being, making errors and expecting to make errors like you expected not to be able to drive a car right away or write right away, and not to think that you're so horrible because you do it, but keep looking at it objectively and correcting and gently and lovingly steering yourself into better reactions and responses. Start loving yourself that way, and you help all of humanity towards the direction of loving man that way, all through and through. You are the only ones who can bring it, the very few who can think and feel this concept and work with it and pour the power of awareness into it. Only these are going to help bring it, and although it is true, the brotherhood of man is inevitable, it must come. It also is quite possible that there may be horrible holocausts and bloodsheds that could be avoided towards it. And only you and I can help do our part in that direction by what we are, what we express, what we emanate. I hope that you see how important it is to love yourself for the sake of humanity, even if you haven't yet discovered how wonderful it would be to love yourself just for the sake of yourself. And remember this, you are destined to be fulfilled. You are destined to be fulfilled because you are an aspect of the Divine Creator with a definitely set goal. Knowing this, like the fool knows it, have the courage to get out there and live and experiment, and more than anything, have the courage to love, and don't be worried about whether anyone does or doesn't deserve to be loved, because then you're just going back to the idea that you feel you don't deserve to be loved, and you're just keeping right on with this hostility. Holding that, you will be doing something fantastically great towards the attainment of what has often been called the eventual millennia of true brotherhood. And then in my Thursday class next time, and then the following Monday, I'm going to give a special technique for those who are working with color and sound to help give extra treatment to this idea at home. And here, on Sunday, every Sunday morning, I'm going to ask that we use the same idea in our meditation to hold. Now, the thing that we're going to have to do is this. Remember that when we go through the colors, we've gone through all 12 colors that are related to the 12 signs of the zodiac. And this relates then to every phase of activity on the planet, and which includes, remember, ourselves. The color, this tone, which brings in the vibration and helps to bring a harmonizing of these elements. Now, because we're bringing about a harmonizing of these elements through the Kabbalistic chant, which has been preceded by this intonational invocations of power, we have far greater power during that period that we're meditating than we have at any other time, to achieve for ourselves and others. Therefore, hold this feeling, now not just the thought. The idea of, dear God, do this and that is a lot of nonsense. You can say that from now till doomsday. That's not the way a divine being, which you are, is supposed to act. Stop groveling in the dust. Be dignified and feel the glory of your power, and know that you are ordained by the divine to be a center of radiation with the rest of us for the feeling of love and brotherhood. Now, and so we say, feel it. Don't just ask for it. Feel love, feel brotherhood, and see it as radiating in and through and interrelating with all people. And don't exclude the rascally Cuban and the super rascally Khrushchev. They too are human beings, and they need this more than anybody else, don't they? To help transmute some of their fanatical nonsense. So all peoples, remember, all peoples, all countries, all of us, do this. Feel it. Feel the love. Feel the brotherhood. Radiate it from yourself as a radiating sun, knowing that the power is throbbing. And please do this every Sunday morning at that time, because along with that we have others from the inner who help to intensify it in other ways, because we create an extra powerful vehicle when we do that together. And remember, even if you did just that, you'd be helping to heal yourself of all kinds of physical ailments, because there's nothing more healing than the upsurges and outpourings of the radiations of love. You surely realize that. So just keep in your awareness that this is an inevitable consequence for yourself and others, and then you won't have to feel that you wanted to take more time to heal some problem that you've got. You will be healing all problems, certainly your own as well as others, in the real methods that are available if you do this. And then continue to do it at home, everywhere. Think of it. When people start fighting with each other, don't get pulled into the emotionalism of the political and the propagandists, all of them, doesn't matter who. Don't get pulled in. Keep yourself above it. You are beyond and should be beyond the mass mind fanaticisms and prejudices. Keep yourself above it, and then that way you will keep the power to help correct that which needs correction in this world, on this planet, and you will be walking in a heaven that is on earth now. And by walking in it now, you'll bring it tomorrow.